I'm Patrick McGuire, and thank you for joining us in the 7th part of our series, Overcoming the Paradigms of Prophecy. This time we're going to cover Revelation chapters 17 and 18, and these chapters cover the judgment of the whore of Babylon, or Babylon the Great. Now, these chapters are nicknames for the Byzantine Empire or the Holy Roman Empire who are judged in these chapters. The title of the nation is Mystery Babylon, the Mother of Harlots. Revelation 17:5 tells us, "And upon her forehead a name was written, and a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth." Now, it has this title because of the origin of its religion. At the Tower of Babel, or Babylon, man had his first united rebellion against Elohim. Babylon was the origin of all false religions that we have today. Now, as opposed to being the bride of Messiah, which is Israel, due to its false religion, this empire is called the Whore of Babylon. It is a pseudo-religious system that is similar to the one described in the assembly at Thyatira in Revelation chapter 2, verses 18 through 29, but we're not going to go there. Now, while it may sound anti-Christian to point out the Babylonian influences in much of Christianity, it needs to be done. The title of the Whore of Babylon, the mother of all harlots, is a reference to the religion of the Byzantine Empire with its Roman Catholic Christianity as well as her daughters and other denominations. Now, we can examine the Babylonian roots of most of the practices of Catholicism and most other denominations, and we'll do that for just a few minutes here. Easter is, for instance, not of Christian origin. It means Ishtar, and it's one of the titles of the Babylonian Queen of Heaven. She is a fertility goddess, and the fertility issue also ties in with the traditions of Easter eggs and the Easter bunny. The pagan origins of Christmas are well known throughout the world, but are disregarded by Christianity worldwide as essentially irrelevant. That is not what the word of Elohim states. In Deuteronomy 12, starting at verse 1, it states, "These are the statutes and the judgments which you shall carefully observe in the land which Yahweh, the Elohim of your fathers, has given you to possess as long as you live on the earth. You shall utterly destroy all the places where the nations whom you shall dispossess serve their gods, on the high mountains and on the hills and under every green tree. And you shall tear down their altars and smash their sacred pillars and burn their asherim with fire. And you shall cut down the engraved images of their gods, and you shall obliterate their name from that place. You shall not act like this toward Yahweh, your Elohim." So he clearly tells us there in Deuteronomy 12, 1 through 4, do not act toward Yahweh, your Elohim, the way the pagans act toward their gods. We cannot adopt pagan practices and present them to Elohim and expect him to accept these offerings. Also continuing in Deuteronomy 12, toward the end of the chapter, verse 29 states, "When Yahweh your Elohim cuts off before you the nations which you are going in to dispossess, and you dispossess them, and dwell in their land, beware that you are not ensnared to follow them, after they are destroyed before you, and that you do not inquire after their gods, saying, how do these nations serve their gods, that I also may do likewise?" Verse 31 says, "You shall not behave thus toward Yahweh your Elohim, for every abominable act which Yahweh hates they have done for their gods. For they even burn their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods. Whatever I command you, you shall be careful to do. You shall not add to nor take away from it." One can easily research the pagan origins of Christmas and Easter, and these pagan holidays were celebrated by pagans by sacrificing their sons and daughters long before they were adopted by Christianity. These pagan things are truly not irrelevant to the Elohim of Scripture. The rosary also is of pagan origin from ancient Babylon as prayer beads. Now also there is no warrant in the word of Elohim to use the cross as a sacred symbol. Its origin came from the mystic Tau of the Chaldeans or the Ankh of the Egyptians. It came from the letter T and is the initial of the name of the god Tammuz. Messiah was actually crucified on a stake or a beam. Stake is the meaning of the Greek word stauros, which is translated cross in most translations of the Brit Hadashah. Yeshua was likely nailed to a beam which was hoisted onto a tree, as Paul states in the book of Galatians. Using censers of burning incense in worship was another abomination that came from the worship of Tammuz. If we look in Ezekiel 8, starting at verse 7, the text states, "Then he brought me to the entrance of the court, and when I looked, behold, a hole in the wall. And he said to me, Son of man, now dig through the wall. So I dug through the wall, and behold, an entrance. And he said to me, Go in and see the wicked abominations that they are committing here. So I entered and looked, and behold, every form of creeping things and beasts and detestable things with all the idols of the house of Israel were carved on the wall all around. And standing in front of them were 70 elders of the house of Israel, with Jezaniah the son of Shaphan standing among them, each man with his censer in his hand, and the fragrance of the cloud of incense rising. And he said to me, Son of man, do you see what the elders of the house of Israel are committing in the dark, each man in the room of his carved images? For they say, Yahweh does not see us. Yahweh has forsaken the land. And he said to me, Yet you will see still greater abominations which they are committing. Then he brought me to the entrance of the gate of Yahweh's house, which were toward the north, and behold, women were sitting there weeping for Tammuz. And he said to me, Do you see this, Son of man? Yet you will see still greater abominations than these. Now Tammuz, the god of vegetation, the Babylonian god of vegetation, he was an ancient nature deity worshipped in Babylonia. A god of agriculture and flocks, he personified the creative powers of spring. He was loved by the fertility goddess Ishtar, who, according to one legend, was so grief-stricken at his death that she contrived to enter the underworld to get him back. According to another legend, she killed him and later restored him to life. These legends and his festival, which took place in the early spring, commemorating the yearly death and rebirth of vegetation, corresponded to the festivals of the Phoenician and Greek Adonis and of the Phrygian Attis. The Sumerian name of Tammuz is Dumuzi. If we look online at a site called Catholic Life for the 90s, the new question box, we see it states, the reasons for celebrating our major feasts when we do are many and varied. In general, however, it is true that many of them have at least an indirect connection with the pre-Christian or pagan feasts celebrated about the same time of the year. Feasts centered around the harvest, the rebirth of the sun at the winter solstice, now December 21st, but December 25th in the old Julian calendar, and the renewal of nature in spring, and so on. If we look at Babylon, the mystery religion, it says, legend has it that Tammuz was killed by a wild boar when he was 40 years old. Hislop points out that 40 days, a day for each year Tammuz had lived on earth, were set aside to weep for Tammuz. In olden times, these 40 days were observed with weeping, fasting, and self-chastisement to gain anew his favor, so he would come forth from the underworld and cause spring to begin. This observance was known not only at Babylon, but also among the Phoenicians, Egyptians, Mexicans, and for a time even among the Israelites. Many church organizations, perhaps unknowingly, dedicate themselves to worship of the sun and even worshiping the day of the sun. We can continue that passage in Ezekiel and see where the worship of Tammuz is tied to worship of the sun. Going back to Ezekiel 8, starting at continuing with verse 16. It says, Then he brought me into the inner court of Yahweh's house, and behold, at the entrance to the temple of Yahweh, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs to the temple of Yahweh, and their faces toward the east, and they were prostrating themselves eastward toward the sun. And he said to me, Do you see this, Son of man? Is it too light a thing for the house of Judah to commit the abominations which they have committed here, that they have filled the land with violence and provoked me repeatedly? For behold, they are putting the twig to their nose, or they're thumbing their nose at Elohim. Verse 18, Therefore I indeed shall deal in wrath. My eye will have no pity, nor shall I spare. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, yet I shall not listen to them. The title the Roman Church gives to Mary is Queen of Heaven. Ancient Babylon used that title to describe the mother of Tammuz 500 years before Messiah. Look in Jeremiah 44, verse 17. But rather we will certainly carry out every word that has proceeded from our mouths by burning sacrifices to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out libations to her. just as we ourselves, our forefathers, our kings, and our princes did in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. For then we had plenty of food and were well off and saw no misfortune. Also, the worship of the mother and her baby has Babylonian origins. The idea of a celibate nunnery came from the pagan practices of the alleged Vestal virgins in ancient Babylon. The practice of a celibate priesthood came from Buddhists and Hindus hundreds of years before Messiah. Confessions to Babylonian priests were used to obtain information and hold tight control upon the people. Prayers to the dead, purgatory, mystery, superstition, idolatry, ignorance of the followers, the priesthood, and Sunday worship all had its roots in ancient Babylon. The origin of Sunday worship is rooted in paganism. If we look at the quote of Tertullian, sometime probably in the middle of the 2nd century, he writes, "Do not many among you pagans, with an affection of sometimes worshiping the heavenly bodies likewise, move your lips in the direction of the sunrise? It is you, at all events, who have even admitted the sun into the calendar of the week, and you have selected its day, Sunday, in preference to the preceding day, as the most suitable in the week for either an entire abstinence from the bath, or for its postponement until evening, or for taking rest and for banqueting. By resorting to these customs, you deliberately deviate from your own religious rights to those of strangers." There is no evidence in the earliest years of Christianity, the apostolic era in the 1st century, that there was any formal observance of Sunday as a day of rest or general cessation from work. We see in Encyclopedia Britannica, 11th edition, 1911, it says the first writer who mentions the name of Sunday as applicable to the alleged Lord's Day is Justin Martyr. This designation of the first day of the week, which is of heathen origin, had come into general use in the Roman world shortly before Justin wrote. All these things first came from ancient Babylon, the mother of harlots. They're practiced by the Roman Catholic Church, and many of them are practiced, if not almost all of them, by Protestant denominations today. Even though most churches are aware of these pagan practices and condemns Catholicism for practicing them, they too embrace many of these same pagan traditions. Most all of these things originated hundreds of years before the time of Messiah, but Yeshua did not practice them. He did not encourage them. As a matter of fact, he condemned the importance assigned to such traditions of men. Look at Mark 7, look at Matthew 15. They're also condemned in other parts of Scripture also. In Colossians 2, verse 8, we see where Paul wrote, "See to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, according to the tradition of men, according to the elementary principles of the world, rather than according to Messiah." And we see that Peter wrote in 1 Peter 1, starting at verse 18, "Knowing that you were not redeemed with perishable things like silver or gold from your futile way of life inherited from your forefathers, but with precious blood as of a lamb unblemished and spotless, the blood of Messiah." Okay, with that as our foundation, let's start looking at the whore of Babylon and her judgment in Revelation 17, starting at verse 1. "And one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me, saying, 'Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality, and those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality.'" We're told several things about the whore of Babylon. It says she sits upon many waters. Now, the many waters means she controls many peoples, nations, tribes, and tongues. Look in Revelation 17, verse 15, we're told exactly what that means. "And he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues." It says, "with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication." Now, the power struggles and deals with the Roman church and the kings in that day is thoroughly documented in world history. The popes in history often claimed control of countries with the threat of keeping the royalty and the citizens out of heaven through excommunication. It says, "The inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication." Unfortunately, much of Christianity has adopted a lot of Babylonian paganism. The same warning was given in the day of Jeremiah. Look in Jeremiah 51, starting at verse 6, where it says, "Flee from the midst of Babylon, and each one of you save his life. Do not be destroyed in her punishment, for this is Yahweh's time of vengeance. He is going to render recompense to her. Babylon has been a golden cup in the hand of Yahweh, intoxicating all the earth. The nations have drunk of her wine, therefore the nations are going mad." Many of the institutions of Christianity have made people drunk and confused with idolatry, pagan tradition, and claims of being the only way to Elohim. The reason the judgment of the whore of Babylon is included in Scripture, which is the Byzantine Empire, is because that Byzantine Empire controlled Jerusalem for 88 years. Keep in mind that that sealed book in Revelation 5 and 6 is the title deed to the land of Israel, and I think that was very well established. Since the Byzantine Empire reigned over Israel for 88 years, they are included in this book of Revelation. Their anti-Semitic actions were performed in Jerusalem also by the Babylonians. We read further in Jeremiah 51, verses 47 and 48, "Therefore, behold, days are coming when I shall punish the idols of Babylon, and her whole land will be put to shame, and all her slain will fall in her midst. Then heaven and earth and all that is in them will shout for joy over Babylon, for the destroyers will come to her from the north, declares Yahweh." Many of the institutions of Christianity have made people drunk and confused with idolatry, pagan tradition, and claims of being the only way to Elohim. Now, the reason the judgment of the whore of Babylon is included in Scripture is because the Byzantine Empire controlled Jerusalem for 88 years. Keep in mind that the sealed book in Revelation 5 and 6 is the title deed to the land of Israel, and we established that firmly using Scripture. Since the Byzantine Empire reigned over Israel for 88 years, they're included in this book of Revelation. The Babylonians' anti-Semitic actions were performed in Jerusalem also. You can see in Jeremiah 51, verse 24, it says, "But I will repay Babylon and all the inhabitants of Chaldea for all their evil they have done in Zion before your eyes, declares Yahweh." Going back to Revelation 17, verse 3 states, "And he carried me away in the Spirit into a wilderness. And I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names and having seven heads and 10 horns." Now, the beast is the Muslim empire described in Revelation 13. The Byzantine Empire had a relationship with the Muslim empire in the First Crusade. They were both intent on destroying the Jewish people. While it is well known how the Muslims have killed Jewish people, some examples of the Holy Roman Empire doing the same are as follows. In 1096, the spring, the Crusaders in France and Germany. Over 1/4 of the Jewish population of Germany and northern France were killed during the First Crusade, mostly during the months of April and June. We see in 1096 of May 27th in Germany, it says, "Count Amico entered Mayence. Approximately 1,200 Jews took refuge in the episcopal palace, and seeing no other escape from forced conversion, chose suicide using ritual slaughter knives. Each family head killed his wife and children, with the leaders killing themselves last. The idea of suicide, normally abhorrent, was considered acceptable or even preferable under these conditions. One Jew by the name of Isaac, his 2 daughters, and a friend called Uriah allowed themselves to be baptized. Within a few weeks, Isaac, who was remorseful of his act, killed his daughters and burned his own house. He and Uriah went to the local synagogue, locked themselves in, and burned it down. A large part of the city was destroyed." In 1096, on June 27th, in Germany, massacre of the Jewish population. This was the second massacre in Xanten in a month. 50 Jews died. At Eller, 5 Jewish community leaders were assigned the task by the community of killing all the members and then themselves, rather than suffer at the hands of the Crusaders. Out of a community of 300, only 4 remained. They were badly wounded. In 1096, in Normandy, France, a massacre of Jews under the rule of one of William the Conqueror's sons. As a consequence, more Jews decided to move to England. In 1099, July 15th, in the land of Israel, they entered Jerusalem, drove all the Jews into the synagogue, and set them afire while he marched around the synagogue singing, "Christ, we adore thee." This marked the end of Jerusalem as a Jewish center for centuries, although Jews did return in limited numbers after the Muslim reconquest in 1187. It is estimated that between 20,000 and 30,000 Jews were massacred or captured and sold as slaves in Italy. Revelation 17 verse 4 says, "And the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup full of abominations and of the unclean things of her immorality." Now, these two colors do indeed describe the Byzantine Empire. Let's take a look at a website in ancientworlds.net, where it states, "If in Rome a single stripe of murex purple had signified wealth, prestige, and at times even aristocracy, how much more significant was a Byzantine subject dressed in a purple garment, or better yet, in a purple silk garment? More prestigious still were the purple silk garments woven with a gold thread in patterns of varying degrees of intricacy. And what of the Byzantine imperial children, literally and in every symbolic sense born to the purple, raised in the porphyra, a room with pillars with a floor of polished purple porphyry, hung all around with perfumed purple drapes. As a finishing touch, there was also imperial footwear, crimson or scarlet sandals or boots for men and women alike." So we can see the colors of the aristocracy of the Byzantine Empire were purple and scarlet. It says, "She is adorned with gold and with precious stone and pearls." The wealth of the Byzantine Empire is well known. This is an almost identical description of the warning given in Torah. If they fall into idolatry, Elohim will strike them with wormwood, and they will follow the desires of their hearts instead of following Torah. Let's take a look at Deuteronomy 29, starting at verse 17, where it says, "Moreover, you have seen their abominations and their idols of wood, stone, silver, and gold, which they had with them." If you look in Revelation 17, verse 4, it says, "She is adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a gold cup full of abominations." So while really it's not their adoration, but it is their adornment with this whore of Babylon. Verse 18, "Lest there shall be among you a man or a woman, or family or tribe, whose heart turns away from Yahweh our Elohim, to go and serve the gods of those nations, lest there shall be among you a root bearing poisonous fruit and wormwood, and it shall be, when he hears the words of this curse, that he will boast, saying, I have peace, though I walk in the stubbornness of my heart, in order to destroy the watered land with the dry." The text states in Torah, Yahweh shall never be willing to forgive him, but rather the anger of Yahweh and his jealousy will burn against that man, and every curse which is written in this book will rest on him, and Yahweh will blot out his name from under heaven. And we're looking at the destruction of this Byzantine Empire, and you're going to see the curses of Torah are laid upon that empire as we continue here. It says, "The golden cup full of abominations," in that passage, "and the filthiness of her fornication, that is the idolatry and worship of gods other than Elohim." Verse 5 says, "And upon her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth." The Babylonian pagan religions were wrapped up in the person of the harlot. She is the personage of the false Babylonian religion. The destruction of Babylon the Great was told to us in Revelation 14, verse 8, and the timing of the warning of this destruction of the Byzantine Empire in Revelation 14, starting at verse 8, fits well with the chronology of the resurrection of the beast, which we'll read about in these chapters and in history. And unfortunately, we're out of time right now. And we'll continue next time where we left off, and we'll look at the timing in Revelation 14 of the destruction of Babylon the Great. Thank you very much for joining us. Tell your friends about us, and we look forward to continuing. May Elohim greatly bless you.